Welcome to Pillars of Leadership podcast. I'm Doug Hagedorn, and today we have Bob Shallow with us. Hi, Bob.
Hi, Doug. Thank you.
Looking forward to this. Kind of a unique way that we met. Seems that a lot of meetings are taking place and relationships are established through LinkedIn, and that's actually how we met. Through some, I guess, intelligent networking or random God networking. I don't know exactly how it came about, but Bob has just moved, so we won't ask him to show the boxes, and it says blessed in the background there, but it might be stressed and blessed. No, are you good?
No, we've moved a lot, so we've gotten pretty good at it, and so this probably was one of the least stressful moves, and we're getting all settled in and whatnot.
Gotcha. All right. Well, I'm glad for you. Um, So Bob has been with C12 Business Forums for 10 years, and I'm going to ask him to talk about that and kind of how what doors opened and why he got involved with that. One of his taglines was growing leaders that transform lives. And so he evidently had a passion for leadership. And so I want to talk about that today. He's a PhD candidate at Liberty University there in Virginia, organization, management, entrepreneurship. He'll be an instructor at North Greenville University teaching transformational leadership and change management, a master's in engineering. So he's much smarter than I am from Wayne State. Where's Wayne State? Is that Michigan?
Detroit, yep, it's in Detroit area.
Okay, maybe we've got a Michigan connection. I don't know. We'll have to explore that someday. So I'm a legacy Detroit Tiger fan and
So am I. Go
okay.
blue.
Oh no. If you look real hard,
You're green.
if you look
Are
real
you
hard
green?
here, can you see this?
Um,
We got a little
yeah,
Sparty going on there for you. You gonna hang on?
I'm sorry. Yeah,
You guys
I'll hang on.
You guys have a national championship. Don't get too proud on me here. I know. Congratulations. And Harbaugh
Thank
living in
you.
an RV is entertaining to me.
Harbaugh's entertaining just always. So
Just
yeah,
being Harbaugh. Yeah.
him now being an on, he is.
Yeah. So the other reason I wanted to have you on is because I've been talking about leadership transitions and marketplace and ministry, and you had a long and illustrious corporate career, 28 years, vice president of quality, a line manager at Ford Motor, and that's probably why you're in Detroit, I guess, a little bit, huh?
Yep.
And so I want to talk kind of about that too. But anything else in your history, your personal life, anything you want to share? Um, Anything to add on your history?
Um, just that, it's been amazing for me to watch how God has moved. So my Michigan connection is I grew up there. So I grew up in a small town called Belleville, Michigan, which
Oh yeah.
wasn't too far from Ann Arbor, which is why I chose them over the Green School. Um, but when I left Michigan, I left Michigan to go to school in California. And I basically said, I'm never, ever coming back. I hate the winters.
Yeah, good.
And you could never pay me enough to work for an auto company. And God chuckled and said, I hear you, but I got a different plan. And so I did end up back there. Ended up working for Ford Motor Company for 16 years, which I had no business even being at because I graduated from a small school near San Francisco called Cal State Hayward with a degree in computer science. And God got me into Ford Motor Company as a contract employee doing some database development that eventually ended up turning into a full-time gig. And then he started moving me throughout the company, got me into the reason I was ended up at Wayne State was that was a Ford thing. I kept asking, could I get into the engineering world? And they kept laughing at me and saying, you didn't go to Michigan or Purdue or any of the great engineering schools. And so I said, well, what would it take to get me there? They said, a miracle is what it would take to get you there. I said, well, you have this Masters of Engineering Management thing with Wayne State. And they said, yeah, and we only take the best and brightest engineers we have, and we only take 25 of them every year. And I was on a campus that had 50,000 engineers in Dearborn. And so they said, there's no possible way you're ever getting into that. And I said, well, what would it take? And they said, well, your manager has to nominate you. You have to write a thesis. You have to do a bunch of interviews. Again, it's only the best of the best. I said, well, does it hurt me to do that? I said, no, you can give it a shot. 6 months of all that stuff. And at the end of it, they said, man, we were shocked. You got to number 2 on the waiting list. I said, well, what's the odds of somebody dropping out of this thing? He said, nobody's ever dropped out of this thing. It's the most difficult thing to get into. 2 weeks later, they called me up and said, 2 people just got transferred to Europe. You're in.
Wow.
And so I was suddenly in Ford's most prestigious program. It was a Master's of Engineering at Wayne State in Engineering Management. And when I graduated from that, they did put me out on a program team. It was the beginning of the Ford 500 and the Ford Freestyle. I was in project management at the time, and eventually God ordained me into engineering and got all the way up. I was the vehicle line manager for the Taurus and Sables. So I had the crown jewels for a couple of years. And it was pretty bleak at Ford at this point in time. This was 2005. It was a year before Alan Mulally came on board, and so they were treating people poorly. And so I felt it was time to move. And so that's when God started to move me through just some incredible opportunities. I was the director of warehouse products for Hyster-Yale, the largest manufacturer of forklifts in the United States. It was a $200 million business that I was running for about 4 years. And then he got me into a Dover Corporation operating company, Tulsa Winch Group, where I was the vice president of engineering and quality and the continuous improvement piece of it. And I was then identified as the next president of the company. It was a $200 million business in Tulsa. And that's when God threw the curveball and said, I gave you this incredible 28-year career, not so that you could go off and run a company, but I want you to go work with entrepreneurs in order to help them build great businesses for a greater purpose. And so in 2014, heard about C12 for the very first time. And it was clear that's where God was leading us, led us to Jacksonville. Didn't know a soul. And so I was going to start from scratch this practice, this C12 practice without knowing anybody. And 10 years later, we have over 100 members. I have 4 chairs. We have revenues of almost $1 million a year. And God has really blessed as we have tried to be obedient to where he was leading, even though we didn't understand it. But he certainly has blessed as we've done that. And now he has said, now I want you to go teach the next generation how to build great businesses for a greater purpose at North Greenville University.
Wow, what a story. That's some great addition to what I mentioned. But so you mentioned God in there. I was counting 5 or 6 times. How to talk about that piece of it in the integration of your faith? You said God led, God spoke, God ordained, God opened doors. For people who may not get that, and I've never had the audible voice of God, but I've had the leading of the Holy Spirit and the leading of God. Can you talk about that a little bit and some of those transitions? How in the world you sound so confident, and I know I've got that same confidence, but how do we know it was God, and what happened along the way?
I certainly didn't always have that confidence. And so, when I was getting ready to graduate from high school, the first big decision is where should I go to college? And it was, God, where do you want me to go? And so I was doing the things that most Christians do, praying, looking for signs, as he opening doors. And I felt like he led me to California. And that was kind of, as he was leading me in these other places at Ford Motor Company, I didn't really do a whole lot of anything. He just kept opening these doors, and it had to have been him. The way that I ended up getting into engineering uh, was nothing short of a miracle. Again, I talked about it, and they looked at my credentials. In fact, I still remember the story. They were when they were looking for the next vehicle line manager for the Taurus Sable. By that time, I was in engineering, but that was being picked by the top vice presidents in the company because it was a position that they used to groom the next leaders in the company. And so the candidates, they get in a room and they talk through the resumes. And one of the guys that was in there, he came and he shared with me, he said, probably the most respected VP in Ford Motor Company picked up my resume and said, what in the world is this even doing in this pile?
Wow.
This person doesn't have even remotely the credentials for this. And yet I ended up getting the job, which only
Wow.
God orchestrated. When I really started to understand a lot of this is more in my C12 journey as far as how do you really abide? How do you really hear God's voice? How do you really uh, um, discern what God is revealing to you? And it was through a couple of resources. One was a gentleman that you just recently had on here, which was Richard Blackaby, and
Oh yeah.
it was Experiencing God, the book Experiencing God that he and his dad wrote. And the way I came about that is I had been connected with a gentleman named Richard Case um, there in the Colorado area as well.
Hmm.
And he did these things called abiding retreats, where he would teach you how to abide. And it was all about how do you truly uh, allow God to reveal and let God uh, guide your steps. And he was taught this from Henry Blackaby. Henry did an experiment about 20 years ago now, I think. He was working with Christian CEOs of some big companies. And so the CEO of Walmart at the time was there. The CEO of the DeBartatello real estate
Oh
was
yeah.
there, who I've had the chance to, since then, be at his ranch. And he did an abiding retreat for one of my groups. And taught some of what Henry was doing. Uh, K-Force International, Dave Dunkel was there, and so Henry took them through. Here is how you can confidently know what it is that God wants you to do. And so he would teach us these in these abiding retreats. And I then was on an every other week call with Dave Dunkel and Richard Case as they would continue to mentor us on what does it really mean to hear God's voice? What does it really mean? And, one of the things that he said that has always stuck with me is we as Christians frequently talk about being fruitful. We're going to be fruitful. We want to see fruit. James said that, you'll know them by their fruit. And he changed a bit of the paradigm on there because what he continued to tell us is apart from God, apart from the vine, apart from Jesus Christ, we can do nothing.
Mhm.
We don't produce fruit.
Right.
Jesus produces fruit through us. We're the branch. Our only job is to remain clinging to the vine and to remain in constant communication with the vine. It's Jesus that produces the fruit.
Well, that
And so
takes a
that
lot of
was,
pressure. That takes a lot of pressure off too, because you know that you can only do so much, and you're gonna let him take over.
and that's it was something when I first started C12, our founder, Buck Jacobs, him and I we were at dinner and we were talking and I was getting ready to launch out into this. And he said, here's the advice that I can give you. And that is that God is your source. Your job is to pray up, suit up, and show up. The
Mm.
results are up to God. And you can see that, but I've had that sitting on my desk now for 10
Nice.
years as a reminder that the results aren't up to me. My job is get up each day. I'm going to pray up, I'm going to suit up, and I'm going to show up. And that was reinforced in 2016 for me. So I've been doing this for about a year and a half, this C12 thing. A year and a half in, I had 8 members. And so I left a very, very lucrative vice president compensation model, had no income. I had to start this from scratch. And a year and a half in, I only had 8 members. And I'd been working with Richard Case now for about 5 months and him teaching this whole abiding thing. And, I told in my abiding time that morning, I told God, look, I've been doing this for a year and a half. I'm working 16 hours a day, 6 days a week. I'm doing everything I'm supposed to do. I hadn't had a new member in almost a year.
Wow.
And I was real discouraged. And I said, clearly, I'm not going to be able to do this. I'm giving it all to you. It's all you now. From here on out, I'll get up in the morning. I'll do my abiding time. You let me know what you want me to do today, and I'll do it. And so that day, he said, go spend some time with your wife. And
Mm,
the next few days, I was doing this other stuff. And then I got a call from one of my members. Hey, this person, can they come to the next forum? Yeah, sure. They came, they joined. Um, Later, the getting ready for the next forum, the next month after that, God said, hey, you remember that individual you talked to about a year ago? Why don't you send them an email? Send them an email. They said, I was just thinking about you. I'm coming to the next forum. And they joined. And he said, hey, you remember this person you talked to? And they wanted to reach back out to him, reached out to him. They said, I was just thinking about you. Came, joined. Next 8 months, a new member every single month. And ever since then, my routine has been, what do you want me to do today, God? And
wow.
do what you want me to do. And I know that you'll be the one that will actually grow all this.
Yeah, well, that builds the confidence. I think you just did a great job of explaining that historically, and there's always bumps along the way, and usually those are the times we can choose to lean into him and on him more, or try and do it in our own strength. And usually us men and type A men learn the hard way, and we'll do everything we can. And at least though, then you've exhausted the flesh, right? And
Right.
the
Yeah.
flesh is weak, but the spirit is willing. I'm going to read just one thing because you talked about it. John 15 said, abide in me and I in you, as the branch cannot bear fruit of itself unless it abides in the vine. Neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. He who abides in me and I in him bears much fruit. For without me, you can do nothing. And you said that apart from me,
Right.
you can do nothing. If anyone does not abide in me, he's cast out as a branch, withered. Sometimes we feel withered or stressed or just burnt out when we've tried to do it in our own strength. And John 15:7, if you abide in me and my words abide in you, you will ask what you desire and it shall be done for you. So,
Yeah.
that asking, I just started, Richard Blackaby was a great guest, but
Yeah.
he challenged me to go back to, because I went through his Experiencing God study and it was very pivotal in my new walk with the Lord. And so he does a book club with his kids every week. And that really inspired me. My kids are across the country, one in Texas, one in Virginia, and us here in New York. And so this past week, we started our Bible study on Sunday nights, 40 minutes, Zoom call, in and out. And we do one chapter. We did Acts chapter 1 this week. But so I say that just to say that prayer and reflection and stepping back, taking some margin, forcing that margin, because the 16-hour days are not easy, but they're the only solution sometimes. That's all we know. I'm just going to
Yeah.
work harder, Lord, and try harder, and we need to do that. We need to apply ourselves. But then there's also the seasons and really a daily season of forcing ourselves into taking that time and doing that.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned C12 now about 500 times, and people are wondering, what is it and why did you get into it?
So it's an interesting format, and been around for about 30 years now. And the way that it came about is our founder, Buck Jacobs. He was the director of Florida for an organization called FCCI, Fellowship of Christian Companies International. And so what he was doing down there in Florida after his corporate career, which did entail a stint where he was working with the company where they were trying to use the company in order to advance the gospel. But now he's down in Florida. He's working with Christian most businessmen for the most part, and they would do lunches or breakfasts that were really more Bible studies. You know, let's get together as Christian businessmen and let's study the Bible together. He had the opportunity to go to this peer advisory group. At the time, it was called Tech. It's now known as Vistage, which is actually the largest peer advisory group in the world at this point in time. But he had an opportunity to go to one of these meetings, and he came out of it going, man, if we could take what they do, and what they would do is they would get, 12 business people around the table. They'd usually have a speaker that would come in that would talk about business best practices. So they would get some learning, some education around business best practices, and then they would have an opportunity to share, hey, here's what I'm struggling with in my business, and leverage the knowledge, wisdom, and experience of their peers around the table. He said, if we could take that and marry it with our Christian faith, that could be really, really powerful. And so in the kind of Tampa area, FCC took it to FCCI, said, hey, thinking the Lord wants me to do this. They said, well, go give it a shot. Tampa area, he got 3 groups up and running relatively quickly. He said, yeah, this definitely is what God wants me to do. They said, yeah, we don't think that's what God wants us to do. And so he kind of broke off. And so over those 30 years, we have grown from nobody to we now have over 4,000 members literally across the world now. We are worldwide. And so what we do is we come together one day every month, Christian business owners and CEOs. We have a time of checking in with each other. We call it our balance wheel. We are very big on we should be leading a balanced life. So how's your marriage? How's your walk with God? How are you doing with your family? How's your rest and retreat? How's your nutrition? How's your business? How's your ministry through your business? We then do a devotional, and these usually aren't your Sunday school feel good devotionals. These are, let's get real about this whole thing. Want to grow, let's be real with each other, authentic with each other. Let's get some conviction going with these devotions. And then we would move into our learning segments. And so we have a curriculum. At one point in time, it was, we'd go through it every 8 years. Now we're always looking at what's kind of going on out there, but it definitely is best of the best curriculum. In fact, we have a partnership with Regent University. They took a look at our curriculum and said, yeah, this is top notch. In fact, if one of your members gets into one of our programs, we'll give them 9 credit hours if they've been a C12 member for 2 years or more because of what they've been learning at C12. So we'll do a business segment. We'll get into John Maxwell and Lencioni and Jim Collins and those types of things. And then we'll do a segment on, okay, now you own this business. God has given you this resource. How can you use that business as ministry? And that's the morning. So that's just the morning. We then have lunch in the afternoon. Each member once a year will do what we call a core business presentation, where they'll go real deep into the business, share that with their peers, give their peers an opportunity to speak into them and give them challenge what they're doing, give them advice, give them counsel. For a lot of members, it's been life-changing, that core business presentation. In fact, several of them will say, what I gained there was worth a lifetime of C12 dues because of all that I gained. We then go to that open table time where anybody can bring, what are you struggling with in business? What is your pain points? Can be business, can be spiritual, can be family, can be personal, in order to get that Holy Spirit-led knowledge and wisdom from the peers around the table. We believe in accountability, and so we wrap up with each member will commit to 3 to 5 things that they're going to do before the next meeting in order to continue to grow. And so that is the peer advisory experience. I then meet with or the chair will meet with each member for what we call a Focus 60. We will look at the last 30 days. What did you accomplish? What were your struggles? What were some things we need to work on? And then in the next 30 days, we'll set some goals around what do you want to accomplish? What are you going to do? My role there is coaching, advising, consulting, and that is the C12 experience.
Wow, that seems powerful. Of the 4,000 members, these are typically local forums, local monthly get-togethers. Do the peers end up working together, befriending, leaning on each other as part of these groups outside of the forum?
Yeah, and that's what you'll see is the longer that these forums are together, that kind of becomes their tribe. These are their most trusted individuals. It's what really struck me. So when I first heard of C12, I was in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I was the vice president there. I wanted to check this out. I wanted to experience what is C12. And so I went down to Dallas. And I'm, on the drive down there, I'm going, I've done every training you can imagine. I'm in
No
Fortune
more
3
training,
companies.
please. Right.
I've done all the professional development, I can't imagine I'd experience anything that I haven't experienced before. And I came away going, this is way different because these individuals end up getting real with each other and authentic with each other, and not to pound their chest and say, look at me. It's because they love each other so much.
Cool.
And that's what struck me was in this afternoon, they were challenging their peers not to show how smart I am. They were challenging them because they have a love of Christ that they want them to do better. And that group had been together for about 4 years, but you could tell how different this was than just your normal business forum.
Wow, that sounds powerful. Yeah, when I first stumbled upon it, I thought, okay, I've started small men's groups and we lean on each other and they've been powerful and long lasting, but this goes deeper beyond a business Bible study or a Christian networking. And I would guess most of your folks coming are small business owners, or is
So
it a
yeah,
mix?
we generally we're looking for Christian business owners, mostly 2 million or more in revenue, 10 or more employees. Uh, Probably the majority of our members are kind of in that 3 to 7 million is kind of where they sit. Usually 20 to 50 employees is where they sit. And so most of our curriculum has a org development bent to it as far as how do
Okay.
you run these organizations. Most of our members are men, but again, we feel like the more diverse the forum can be, the more powerful it can be. And so we're not men only. We do have a fair amount of women. And to be perfectly honest, what we probably mirror is the demographics of the community. So whatever
Sure.
the business owner demographics of the community looks like, that's usually what we'll end up in looking like as well.
Okay, all you women candidate owners out there, come on. Sounds like we might need some of that. I was really impressed by because when you talk Christianese, this could be perceived as just a Bible study, right? And lean on each other. And those are powerful. So any Bible study is not just a Bible study, first and foremost. But you guys had a 5-point alignment matrix, which looks at revenue. How do you grow that? How do you build that? Financial stewardship, looking at your margins, how you take care of your people, your culture, the organizational development, and then something called BAM. Can you explain that?
So there's two different acronyms that you can get for BAM. There's BAM, which is business as ministry. And that's been around probably 20, 30 years, that term, business as ministry. I own a business as ministry. It probably was about 7 years ago, we started to transition from business as ministry to business as a ministry. And that may seem subtle, but it really isn't. Usually, when we think of business as ministry, we think about these businesses that are owned by Christians. They do stuff in their community, they give money to nonprofits. As you move into business as a ministry, what you're recognizing is God has given you this platform. He's given you this business. And it's not your business. He's given it to you to steward. It's his business. And if it's his business, the focus has to be ministry. It has to be serving people. And so it's business as a ministry. And, what's interesting is a lot of people will perceive us as, well, you're just a Bible study for Christian business owners, or you're business networking. We're not either of those. What we are is we want to work with these stewards of businesses to achieve our mission. And our mission is to equip Christian CEOs and owners to build great businesses for a greater purpose. We want to help them understand that they have an incredible amount of resource. And if they know how to use it well, they can advance the gospel through that resource. Billy Graham, some people, it's not pinpointable when he said it, though I still believe he said it at the Lucerne movement in 1972. He said the next great movement of God is going to be through people in the marketplace.
Billy Graham said in the 70s that if there's to be awakening, there's going to be a revival that probably come from Christians in the marketplace. And in some ways, I feel like God has been preparing C12 for 30 years for this moment.
We're seeing some of that. We see a movement. Haven't quite got to that great movement yet, but I think that's where C12 comes in, is where, as churches right now are very much struggling with how do we reach the next generation? How do we continue to grow? How do we maneuver through the culture that we're seeing that is changing so dramatically? They're struggling with that, but yet business deals with that every day. And the average business owner probably touches 5,000 or more people in a year. That's way more than the average church is touching.
Wow.
And so if we can teach those business owners how to leverage all of that, we have seen just incredible stories of the gospel advancing, people being saved, people growing spiritually, and then the good that is done to the least of these by serving the homeless and the widows and the orphans and all of those things that God is asking us to do.
There are the poor businessman and woman or engineer have oftentimes been saddled with guilt, thinking, I'm not going to seminary, God's not using me. Guess what? Business is a calling and engineering is a calling. And so don't run from that, embrace it and just figure out ways. This is one way to integrate your faith. and to get wisdom. James 1:5 says, if you lack wisdom, ask of God, and he will give it to you without finding fault. But as I was praying about our time together today, one scripture dropped, and it was 2 Corinthians 6:14. And it's usually in terms of, I used it with my daughter growing up. Do not be yoked with unbelievers, right? Well, it's also true here is this is an opportunity to be yoked with believers and to practically learn how to integrate your faith. You hear the scripture, iron sharpens iron. That's tough to get in the C-suite. And if you're a small business owner, you're surrounded by pressure, stress, customers, employees that may not know the Lord, and they may not walk with the Lord. And so how you do that practically, this just sounds like a great opportunity. The other thing in this, we were studying with my kiddos in this virtual Bible study, and I was I try to stay a few chapters ahead of them. As a good teacher, you know this. You just have to stay a week ahead of your students. That's it. And so I'm 5 weeks ahead of them, and they don't even know it yet. But I'm in Acts chapter 6. We're doing one chapter a week. And the 12 summoned the multitude of disciples. So there was a bunch of disciples. So it's not just the 12. And said, it's not desirable that we should leave the word of God and serve tables. So they were bivocational, maybe even probably trivocational, building tents and then serving tables, being servant leaders, and then doing ministry, right? So marketplace and ministry, this whole concept of integration. The challenge was here, therefore, brothers, seek out from among you 7 men of good reputation, full of the Holy Spirit and wisdom, whom we may appoint over this business. But they knew that they needed to transition more into ministry. We will give ourselves continually to prayer and to the ministry of the word. And so the way they did that was delegation. And so, and I want to talk about that kind of as our last subject here a little bit, is the power of delegation, because these leaders that are coming to C12 and leaders in general, you were working 16-hour days during your transition. And oftentimes we have the solution. We know the solution. We see the vision. We're just going to, as they say in Texas, get her done. We're just going to do it ourselves. It'll be quicker, less painful. But that goes into, that's in conflict with the 7 that were chosen to serve here, is finding those that you can delegate to and then being willing to do that. A lot of employees, including Gen Zers and Millennials, 74% of them are job hoppers. And so, and usually they do it quickly. I've had many Gen Zers and Millennials, and they're gone after 2 years, and you know it. They're looking for values, they're looking for meaning in their job, they're looking for career opportunities, they're looking for care. And as leaders, we have to learn to nurture that. And part of that is delegation. Any thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I just wrapped up a couple of classes for my PhD, and one of them was human resource management, and it went deep into our responsibility as Christians. And it was interesting because last month in one of our C12 segments, there was an interesting quote, and the quote was that when we don't delegate, we may be robbing somebody from fulfilling the calling God has given them.
Yes, yes.
We stole it from them. And in this class on human resource management, the theme throughout it was that one of our largest responsibilities, if not our highest priority as leaders, is absolutely ministering to our direct reports, our employees. They went deep into the fact that Jesus said the two greatest commandments are love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and body, and love your neighbor. And, he went in and talked about the Good Samaritan and trying to show who your neighbor was. But another one of our neighbors are our direct reports.
Mm-hmm.
Our direct reports is our neighbor.
Exactly.
We should be loving them as we love ourselves. And the way that we can love them best is nurturing and growing them. That's why, the phrase that I have of growing leaders who transform lives, I have a passion around that. Throughout my corporate career, in fact, as I get back in contact with some people that worked for me and whatnot, they'll bring it back up about what they appreciated most was that I was constantly trying to help them grow. I was teaching them, I was giving them books, I was helping them learn. And they appreciated that. And as leaders, that should be our number one responsibility, is those that God has entrusted to us in our leadership, we should be growing them. And every time we jump in to do something, we're robbing them of that opportunity to
Yes,
grow.
absolutely.
I still believe one of the best books on leadership out there is Henry and Richard Blackaby's Spiritual Leadership. It's a very paradigm shifting book because we believe that leadership is all about inspiration and motivation.
Right.
And they have a very interesting premise. They believe that leadership, the sole purpose of leadership as a Christian, is to move people to God's agenda. That's what a leader does. A leader moves people to God's agenda. Now, there's something implied in there, which is I need to know God's agenda. And that's where they suggest read Experiencing God and Hearing God's Voice, so that you know that. And when you know God's agenda, you now want to move people to it. And our current culture, our secular culture, is that leadership is all about being, as it were, praised, being the guy that's out there out front. What's interesting is if you read Good to Great and what Jim Collins talks about from a leader perspective, it's about a person that has, incredible drive, but they're humble and they sit in the background. It really is kind of what servant leadership and Christian leadership is all about, even though Jim Collins is not a Christian. And right now we have far too many people that in the church, far too many people in the church that want to lead because they want to be seen, they want to be in the limelight. And what Jesus was trying to teach us is, if you truly want to be a leader, one, look at me as the example. I was a shepherd. That's what I did, is I shepherded. I wasn't the one that was sitting out there saying, hey, we're going to go take that mountain. Hey, we're going to go do all this great stuff. He got 12 men around him and he poured into them and helped them grow, because that is how you multiply. Yeah. And we have too many leaders that aren't multiplying because everything has to go through them. They're not delegating any sort of authority. They're not growing. They're not teaching. They're not doing the things that Jesus modeled for us and how you would be a great leader.
Yeah, he prepared the disciples and then sent them out 2 by 2. So there was the time of preparation, and then he delegated and checked back in, and he had a group of 3, and he mentored, he discipled. I had a couple of the most researched and successful scholars on followership on the podcast, Dr. Barbara Kellerman and Ronald Riggio. And one of my favorite books is called The Art of Followership. And if you look at Christian leadership, 9 out of 10 books, and I believe it's even more, are on the topic of leadership and not servanthood, not biblical servant leadership. I did a whole course on servant leadership because I believe that if we can just get a hold of that concept, Jesus took up the towel. I mean, he he washed their feet and he acted. And so that's so much more powerful as a leader, is how you act and how you portray yourself, not just what's on the PowerPoint slide or the vision statement or the quarterly report. And so if Christian leaders and any leader can just get a hold of that the follower is the one who leads the company to success. And we're all followers in most cases. You know, God's called us to follow him, but we are, even CEOs, they might have a chairman of the board, they might have a family that they're leading. And really we need to invert that org structure and look at us as we are at the bottom of the org structure. We are supporting, enabling, and serving our followers and our teams. So I'm glad you mentioned that robbing the follower. Let me share with you this one thing here. So recent survey done on just what we've talked about here, the potential benefits from delegation. And these are percent of managers who rated the reason for delegating. Why should you delegate? Why is it important? And 9 out of 10 said, yes, that's part of leadership development. It's not just sending them to a course. Yeah, come watch my course, but it's got to be experiential learning. You have got to be able to take a risk and delegate. I had one lieutenant colonel who has a metric. Talk about business as ministry. He has a metric for how many times you fail. He says, and I want you to fail at least X times. I can't remember what his number was. He says, if you're not failing, you're not taking enough risks and you're being too conservative as a leader. So that's developing those subordinate skills and confidence, is delegating, enabling them to deal with problems. If you give them the solution and answer every time, again, you're robbing them, but you're not developing them. What's your succession plan? How are you going to grow as a small business if you can't develop, a couple followers that are going to multiply, right?
And the other piece of that is and I see it, as I work with entrepreneurs, the entrepreneur that is completely and totally stressed out, that can't sit through a 8-hour forum because their phone is ringing off the hook. I know immediately that's a micromanaging leader, because everything has to come through them. If you delegate well, it should make your life a whole lot less hectic. As Jesus sent out the 72 by 2, he then went and spent time with the Father.
Yes.
He didn't say, and I'm going to visit you and see how you're doing, and I'll keep checking in. And, he went back and did what he needed to do, which was to re-engage with the Father. And that's why that delegating model is so important. I believe Toyota is the best run company in the world. They're not Christian by any stretch of the imagination, but they have something called a 5-to-1 ratio. They don't believe any supervisor can have more than 5 direct reports, because that's the most that you can truly mentor well. They believe their supervisors are not supervisors, they're mentors. Their purpose is to grow their direct reports, and it's why the company has had the success that they have had. And again, I think it's something that I try and teach all of my members or students, is that as a leader, your number one priority is to grow those leaders that God has entrusted you. And when that occurs, the organization is better, and whatever it is that your mission is, it's going to be achieved far quicker when you are growing leaders around you, rather than thinking that every single important decision has to come through you.
Yeah, and James McGregor Burns in 1978 wrote Leadership, the book Leadership, and he was one of the first to talk about servant leadership and followership. And he said it is a symbiotic, reciprocal relationship. It's meeting the needs. Robert Greenleaf talked about that too. It's before you can meet a need of the follower, you have to understand it. And so it's similar to delegating, is giving them, teaching them, training them, and then letting them go. Here's a couple other ones. Improve the decisions by moving them closer to the action. Get them closer to the profit and loss, where you're making money, where you're struggling.
Right.
And, some of my best improvement projects over my corporate years have been involving the people on the manufacturing line, involving people closest to the work in ideation and coming up with solutions to improve the processes, reducing lead time, reducing costs. If you can get them involved in the decision making, you'll have buy-in, and getting them close to the action and getting close to the action with them side by side is powerful as well.
Right.
And
Both of
so,
which are very ingrained in that Toyota culture. That's what
yes,
a Kaizen event is all about.
yes,
We had something called waste walks. That's what waste walks were all about, is getting the executive team out there. They have a term called going to the Gemba. The Gemba
yes,
is going to where the work is done. And that was paramount in their philosophy. I had a situation where we had done a Kaizen event down on the manufacturing floor, and the team was showing us the results, and here's what we're going to go do. And the director of operations kind of kept looking at me, very, very concerned, like, that's not, we need to stop them. That's not going to work. What they're about to do isn't. And he could tell by my look, it was just let them keep going, just let them keep going. They presented, they said, this is what we're going to go do. We cheered them on, and he followed me back to my office and said, that's never going to work. We got to go stop them. And I said, that's the absolute worst thing you possibly can do. They were excited about this. They were energized about it. I said, I agree with you. It may not work, but you got to let them go do it. Because
yes,
if you come in now and say, that's not going to work, here's what you should do, all you told them was you're the answer guy and they need to come to you. And it was interesting because 3 days later, they said, we need to get you guys back together. So the team got us back together, and they said, we started to implement this, and what we found out is it just really isn't going to work. But we learned some stuff, and here's what we think will work. And they went and did
good.
that, and it did, and they were proud in what they had done. And what we taught them was they have the capability to go do this stuff. They have the capability to be problem solvers, and we trust that they're going to do the right thing, and they did.
That's awesome. Yeah. Yeah. You just mentioned a couple of these others here. So you get commitment when you delegate. 9 out of 10 leaders said that as well. And here's one that's nothing evil about this, is making the job more interesting or more fun. And this is again where the if you look at the research, the young Gen Zers and even millennials is, give me something that is interesting and challenges me. And so having a pilot project or trying something and getting people more involved. Of course, this is one we just talked about, reducing your workload so you can, just like the disciples did, manage the things that are really important for your business or sanity, if nothing else. Um, and getting rid of tedious tasks. This started my journey into delegation. I was not very good at delegation, so I started with the things I hated doing, and just said, I know I need a weekly report and a communication. I'm going to delegate that to someone else. But that can grow if they take on a tedious responsibility. They're successful. You coach them through it, or you didn't need to coach them. And then when they're faithful in the little things, you put them in charge of more. It's kind of a biblical concept.
You mentioned EOS earlier. They have a tool in there called Elevate and Delegate,
What
and
is
it is
EOS? I'm sorry.
Entrepreneurial Operating System.
Okay.
The book Traction. And again, what they look at is they have you fill out a 2x2 matrix that basically is, what do I enjoy doing and what am I good at doing? And like all 2x2 matrix, the golden quadrant is the upper right quadrant, which is I enjoy doing it, I'm good at doing it. And what they have you do is you first start out in that area where I'm not good at it and I don't like doing it. And they have you on a certain cadence. I'm going to delegate one of these things. I'm going to take it off my
Okay.
plate and I'm going to go ahead and delegate this. And till you get to the point where the only things that you are doing are the things that are in the upper right quadrant. And I've had many of my members that have gone through that, and they've said that it has been transformational in their day as far as what they're doing. And they have learned how much more talent they have out in their workforce than they originally thought.
Excellent. That sounds like a great resource. I will definitely look at that myself. So here's the reasons for lack of delegation, and I like to call them excuses. And you could probably add to the list yourself, because I was not a good delegator. This is a learned trait. This is a self-development opportunity for most CEOs and even senior leaders, is struggling with this. This is why managers said they didn't delegate. Well, I have to keep this because it's confidential. And that may be true. In some cases, you have to keep things. Well, this is the most important thing on my desk right now. Well, that's a great time to shadow mentor someone maybe and bring them along, have them watch the process. So next time around in the annual operating plan or the next cycle, you have someone else who can do it for you. So mentoring them, another opportunity. Well, this is part of my roles and responsibilities. This is why I took the job, my job description. This is my role. Well, again, that may be an excuse and you can delegate that. This is a visible one. This is a public one. This will increase our stock price or stock impact or our shareholders or the board. I've got to get this right. So again, it may just be a PowerPoint slide or presentation. It might be the research. Maybe there's pieces of it you can delegate it. And this was mine, the 51% one. I can do it better myself, right? It'll get quicker. It'll be quicker. I don't have to answer questions. It's hard to explain, so I've got to spend a whole day training someone. That's short-term thinking instead of, again, developing the employee, but also having them help you the next time around. And then you can see a couple others here, difficult to monitor. And well, I want to keep this one because it's interesting and enjoyable and fun. It involves a trip to Florida or London, right? Or or it involves something that's actually something I enjoy. All right, here's a good chance to get out the towel and serve, give it to someone else and let them do it. Any other thoughts on the delegation, Bob?
No, I think, again, I certainly fell into the category of I could get it done quicker than anybody else. But what really, really transformed my leadership was when I realized that by doing that, I'm not developing those that are around me. And when that paradigm switch happened was when my career really started to take off, when I wanted to make sure that I'm getting the best of the best around me and I'm challenging them, giving them meaty things, taking things off my plate so that I can go and do the strategic stuff while they're doing that piece of it.
It's good. Yeah, we're really talking about, and for sake of time, we won't go deep here, but we're sometimes talking about a culture change. And it may be that your business or your organization, you have an engineering mindset because that's how you're built. That's all you know. Nothing wrong with that. But bringing other people around you in a circle of leadership and influence to go, you have to move from engineering to production, or you know that you have to move from transformational leadership to servant leadership. You've got to shift that culture and shift that. It may be a mindset change, it may be a structure or organizational change, it may be a marketing change or a branding change. But I was reading a Harvard Business Review article that talked about people don't want to just see the slogans. They want a movement and not a mandate, right? They want to be involved. And I think it was, I can't remember who wrote about hearts and habits. They want their heart into it, and then it will develop into a habit as opposed to an edict or a management thou shalt. They want to see this demonstration of servant leadership in action. And one CEO knew what he wanted to do, and he wanted to implement massive change, and he had it all documented, pretty brands and pretty PowerPoint. And all of a sudden he just slowed it down and said, you know what? I'm not going to get it out that way. We as a leadership team are going to put it in action and execution for 4 to 6 months first. Then we'll roll out the marketing and the brand stuff. They want to see it in action first.
Right.
Sometimes that might take longer to go do in changing a culture. Any thoughts on culture?
Lots, actually, but to keep
I
it,
won't give you a culture in 90 seconds edict. You take as
keep
long
it
as
short.
you want.
That's my dissertation is going to be somewhere in that realm, because what I have seen is there's so many Christian business owners out there that will have this mission statement that sounds wonderful, but when I go into their organization and start looking at how things are actually being done, it doesn't match it at all. And it's that double-mindedness that ends up occurring. Oh yeah, I'm doing all of this for God and we're doing great things, but now I got to make money. And the people that are in the organization find out real quick what the true mission statement really is. And so it is all about, are we walking the talk? Are we actually, do our actions reflect what we're saying to everybody? And when they don't, it's a completely different organization. I was talking to one of the people I coach last week. We were talking about lean and what lean looks like. And I told them, when I walk into an organization, if they are truly lean and using lean thought, not lean principles, lean thought, I can feel it the second that I go in there. I can feel the energy. Everybody is energized about what they're doing. And you talked about Gen Z, and that's where the church is losing them, because they'll walk into the church and they'll hear the words, but they don't see the actions.
Yes.
And they do want things that are interesting, but what they really want is purpose. They want to have purpose, and they're looking for companies that when they go there, they feel like that what they're doing has purpose and is accomplishing something. And as Christian business owners, we should have just an incredible competitive advantage of getting the best talent, because we should have businesses that have the highest purpose amongst our competitors. And unfortunately, right now we don't. And that's I heard our pastor yesterday say that we're one generation away from losing the church. It's all it's going to take. And Gen Z is right there.
Yes.
Most of them are not going to church right now. They're walking away from Christianity in droves, but they're in the marketplace. We have a saying in C12 that not everybody has a pastor, but everybody has a boss. I may not be able to get them to church, but they're working. So I can get them out there in the marketplace. And that's where we can't show them the perceived hypocrisy that they're seeing in the church in our business. If we say we're all about advancing the gospel, our business better be all about advancing the gospel. If we say we're all about making money, then fine, at least be truthful about it. But whatever it is that you're saying to Gen Z, they're going to be watching to see whether you're authentic and whether you're really, really trying to achieve those things.
Well, and the leader has, you talk again here about ministry and marketplace, the leader has a greater opportunity than the pastor, because that person's not going to set foot in the church potentially.
Right.
And so by the year 2030, Gen X and the boomers are gone. Millennials and Gen Z make up 74% of the workforce.
Right.
And so we got to get to this now. There should be an urgency in your company, in your organization. Every day, 10,000 boomers reach retirement age. And 80% of CEOs and companies say that they have a leadership development gap. So I just read Peter Senge's book on learning, and there should be an urgency. Yes, there should be an urgency to go do that, and to go train and develop and give people tasks that matter. Brian Dick wrote a great book on redeeming work. And the research shows that if you give employees meaningful work, and which will lead to a calling in some cases, that can be an over spiritualized word, but if you give them meaningful work and they're satisfied, there will be more job satisfaction, more success, more productivity, better results, less depression, less suicide. And the stats go on that if we as leaders can provide that meaning in work, like you said, it's amazing.
I actually cited his book in a paper that I wrote last week that was all about human dignity in work and what God's plan was for work and how we've let it go so far, and all of the things that Brian had said that, in his book absolutely reinforced that, as well as Timothy Keller's book, Every Great Endeavor, has much of that sitting in there as well. And then Hardy has a book called The Fabric of Life, which talks about the exact same thing.
Okay. Well, absolutely amazing time, Bob. Anything, one piece of advice that you'd give to a leader out there?
Yeah, the piece of advice, and I've already basically said it, is if you want to be a great leader, you need to grow the leaders that are around you. That needs to be your highest priority, not, we think the greatest leaders are the ones that achieve the most stuff, but the greatest leaders are the ones that are growing their leaders around them. And as Christians, if you're a Christian leader, that really gets back to that book, Spiritual Leadership, and it should be moving people to God's agenda.
Awesome. Well, we're going to put up the resources, how folks can get in touch with you and how they can become familiar and maybe even join in arms with you with C12, and just look forward to the great things ahead with the PhD. Beat my 7 years. You can do that in a piece of cake, and Lord's blessings on your ministry, and what a great story. Thanks, Bob. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Doug. I've loved being on the podcast, and looking forward to all that God is going to do in and through you in the coming weeks, months, and years.
Thank you, sir.